Two former UK Prime Ministers are accusing the current government of embarrassing the UK. Tony Blair and Sir John Major are urging MPs to reject attempts to override parts of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. This comes as the UK brings back certain lockdown restrictions on Monday and Oxford University restarts its highly promising vaccine trial. For more on this, I'm joined by UK correspondent Ali Barrett. Ali, lots happening. Let's start with COVID-19. So approximately 3,500 new cases daily, and Britain is fearful of a second wave of COVID-19 and has instituted new regulations to take effect from tomorrow. Among them, the rule of six. Tell us more.
Yes, social gatherings this applies to, the rule of six. It means that people cannot gather with more than 6 people indoors or outdoors from Monday. And the government says the reason that it's bringing that rule in, tightening restrictions, is because of the rising number of cases that we are seeing each day now. And it wants to try and get ahead of the curve here and try and stop a second wave from happening in Britain. Daily hospitalisations and deaths remain very low indeed, but the government saying what we are seeing is particularly young people spreading this virus at the moment, so it wants to restrict those contacts between groups of different households to try and break the chain of transmission, because the warning from the government is that if younger people continue to spread the virus, they may not be particularly at risk themselves in terms of health outcomes, but if they pass it on to their parents or their grandparents, then that is where you might start to see fatalities picking up once more. So the rule of six comes in across the UK from Monday, although with some slightly different rules in different places. In Scotland, for example, children don't count towards that number of 6. In Wales, you can still have larger gatherings outdoors, but the rule of 6 is one that is effectively being brought in across the United Kingdom from tomorrow.
The government's taking new regulations very seriously, with fines of up to £3,200 for repeat offenders. There's even talk of a nationwide curfew similar to the one in place here in South Africa.
There is no nationwide curfew in the UK. It has been reported that it might be under consideration, but I think government ministers and the Prime Minister are keen to avoid that if they possibly can. The government has said that if it needed to bring in another nationwide lockdown, it would do so, but again, it wants to avoid that as well if it can. And there are several cities that are under more serious lockdown restrictions at the moment, towns and cities where the infection rate is particularly high, and there are effectively some curfews in place in some of those locations. But as I say, I think nationwide the government will very much try and avoid it if it possibly can.
The R0, that replication number, has jumped from 0.5 in summer to 1.7 now as Britain heads into winter. Some experts have said that Britain's on the verge of losing control of the coronavirus pandemic. Is it really that serious?
Well, again, that number 1.7 comes from a study put together by Imperial, which is data that is fed into the government's decision-making. The actual Department of Health figure for the R is between 1 and 1.2 at the moment. But what that does mean, whichever one of those numbers is correct or whether it's somewhere in between, is that the virus is picking up pace in terms of transmissions. And again, we come back to that idea of the government being very worried indeed about the outbreak picking up pace again as we head into the winter, and wanting to try and get ahead of the curve here. Now, there are scientists, by the way, who say that the outbreak is really just following a pretty predictable trajectory here as we head into winter now in the UK, when respiratory diseases often will pick up pace. And again, it comes back to that crucial idea of whether we start seeing hospitalisations and deaths pick up in a meaningful way. In a sense, rising cases aren't of huge concern if it's not feeding through into hospitalisations and deaths. But that is what the government worries about, that the spread of the virus will get through to older people, more vulnerable people, those who are more at risk, and that could then feed into a higher daily death rate.
Oxford University and AstraZeneca's vaccine trial was stopped after a patient fell ill, but it's now been restarted, with rollout expected as early as Christmas. Is that a feasible expectation?
I think there is growing optimism around the Oxford vaccine, which of course is being trialled in South Africa and as well as several other locations around the world in thousands and thousands of patients. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been speaking, I think it's fair to say, with growing optimism in the last couple of weeks or so about when this virus might be ready. He's talking about perhaps by the end of this year, if not early next year. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is now up and running again after that brief pause. It's not uncommon in trials like this for pauses to happen. Indeed, this was the second in this particular trial, the second time we've had a pause. Up and running again now, though, and a real sense of hope around whether it could be brought online in the not too distant future. We are told that the results that we are seeing so far have been promising.
Right, as if Corona wasn't bad enough, UK also has to deal with Brexit. Another contentious issue at the moment is that internal market bill. So that legislation proposed by Boris Johnson could create serious breaches of trust between the UK and Northern Ireland, and it could also result in either legal action or sanctions by the EU. So why is the Prime Minister pushing for a bill that has such seemingly serious legal conflicts?
Well, he says that the UK has to push for this bill because of concerns about the ways that the UK currently believes the European Union might be minded to implement policy after a no-deal period, after the transition period ends at the end of this year. So Britain's worried that if there is no trade deal with the European Union, that the European Union will then implement rules in a way which would mean Britain was required to effectively have a border in its own country between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So the UK government says it is acting to protect the integrity of the United Kingdom, protect the peace process in Northern Ireland, and just use this as an insurance policy. The European Union does not at all see it that way, says that it's damaging for trust, damaging for trade negotiations, damaging for Northern Ireland, damaging for the peace process. So it very much depends which side you listen to here about who is acting in good faith and who is not.
So an insurance policy, ministers saying this morning that they hope they would never have to apply this rule. But if that's the hope, why have it at all? Is it purely as a threat?
There's certainly an element of this which is, a negotiating tactic. The government is trying to play hardball with the European Union for various reasons. One is to try and win concessions, compromises from the EU to move it towards a trade deal. The other is to look like it's playing hardball for a domestic audience of Brexit supporters here in the UK, so that if Boris Johnson does reach a deal with the EU, he can turn to supporters of Brexit and say, look, I lobbied hard for this. This was a hard-fought, hard-won deal. Also, potentially there is speculation that the government is doing this to sort of prepare the ground to blame the European Union if there isn't any trade deal by the end of the year, to try and head off that situation in terms of the blame game. So all sorts of factors at play here. But yes, you're right. This is definitely part of the negotiating strategy at the moment from Britain.
All right, thanks very much for that update, Ollie Barrett, with the latest UK news from London.